After the tone, please state your name followed by the pound sign.
Your line has been muted.
Control Commission. I'd like to welcome you all to this afternoon's webinar as part of the National 303D TMDL webinar series on story maps. Today's speakers will be Dustin, Shull, and Carrie Tropasso from the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. Before we get going, just a few little housekeeping items. So all phones will be on mute. If for some reason you're not, please also just mute your own lines. After each speaker, there will be a brief time for Q&A. There will also be a longer Q&A section at the end. Please send any questions you have through the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. I will moderate those questions to the speakers. For the majority of the presentations, you might be in full screen. If you'd like to exit out, if you have to ask a question or something, just hover your mouse over the top of the screen and hit the return button. Escape should also work as well. And if you're interested, there are archives of our past webinars in the series available on our website. As someone who had registered, you will all receive an email with that information once this webinar is put online. At the conclusion of the webinar, there will be an exit survey that should pop up. Please just answer a few questions we have there. It's really helpful to us as we plan future webinars. It also gives you a chance to ask any additional questions we may not have had time for today, or you may have thought of afterwards. And we're also always looking for suggestions on future topics that you may be interested in. So as I mentioned, this webinar will be recorded and placed onto our website. That link will be available following. Just has some additional information on some of our webinars as well as handouts and presentations. And I'd also like to announce that our next webinar has been scheduled for Tuesday, November 20th. The topic will be stressor ID and will feature presentations from Connecticut and Washington State. And with that, I will pass it on to Dustin and Carrie.
All right, thanks, Jasper. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and go right into it. So today is going to be a little bit different. We're not going to do anything through PowerPoint presentation, or we're going to actually work directly in ArcGIS Online. And we'll do a presentation and build a story map right in the story map builder, the development aspect. So one of the critical things to creating good communication we found in Pennsylvania is to be able to reach out to the public and show visually stunning representations of what we do and explain things in a detailed manner visually, but through text and simplify text and language so that things are just a little bit easier to understand. We've done that successfully, I think, through two things: story maps, and story maps are connected through the company ESRI, and web reports. So web reports are code-based displays that are also interactive, and we'll get into details about both of them. So for today, we're going to be working in ArcGIS Online. This is kind of what ArcGIS Online looks like. So you have your content, your favorites, your maps, and what it really starts out with is a web mapping application. So we're going to look at tests today, and if I were to go into it, it loads. Anybody familiar with using ArcGIS or ArcGIS Online should be fairly familiar with this screen. It has a description and a title. You can view the application or you can configure the application. For today's purpose, we're going to go ahead and configure the application. So if we do that, this is what it looks like. So welcome to an ESRI Story Map in its development form. There's a couple aspects to this that I'm going to go over. Your general settings are going to be up here at this button here, settings. What it does is it allows you to add a logo, your logo links, your image title, and where it would be found. So you can hit fly. Certain bookmarks can be set up here, and your general appearance. You can do a light theme, a dark theme, your body text. These are your choices for text changes for titles and body. So generally speaking, that's where you get started. From there, you go ahead and start building slides. So in a sense, this is kind of like building a PowerPoint presentation where you're building slides. The difference is these slides have different purposes. There's a couple different kinds. So if you look at it here at the bottom, we have immersives, titles, and text, different slides. This one here, as you can see, is a cover. So covers are fairly simple. What you can do is add a main title, a subtitle, and you can add a background picture or other media. So how do you do that? Well, you go ahead and into the edit mode. And here you can see you can change appearance, the theme of the text, the background. Now this is an important part. So when we view story maps, we can view story maps through a computer or through a tablet or even our cell phone. What we want to do is make sure that in all different platforms, what you're seeing makes sense. So we can make sure that this picture, for example, is looking right in a tablet or in a cell phone by moving this ball around here. Manage. This is where you would change what you see in the background. So it could be a text or a title, a web link, or even a video. This is where that kind of immersive aspect of story maps really comes in to play and is visually stunning. So the next one is called a title. A title slide is very simple. All it is a story, is a background, and typically it introduces the next topic. So as you can see here, the next topic is story maps, and we're going to get into building story maps and what they are. This section here is actually an immersive section. You can see that it's different because you have the ability to add slides within this main slide. And we'll get into the details of that later on. So within each slide, you can add text. Here you can see I added this ESRI Story Map, the main page for ESRI Story Maps in here. We like to use cascades. There's a lot of different kinds of story maps. Carrie, if you want to just briefly talk about the different kinds of it.
Yeah, so we're just, again, like Dustin said, we're just using the general ESRI Story Map, and they have probably 11 or 12 templates right now that are available to anyone who has an ArcGIS Online organizational account. If you're using a free account, your options are a little bit more limited than that, but they include things like a tabbed interface. You can have what's called an accordion, where it's things that sort of compress on the side, so basically a lot of text. There's the cascade, which is what we're going through here right now, and that is more like an immersive website. So basically, this flows like a website. There's also a map tour, which is kind of a virtual picture tour, so you actually click on different pictures. There's one called a short list, which is kind of nice. It's kind of picture and text as well as map, and it runs you through everything in sort of a very different format, but again, getting the picture across. There's also a map journal, which is sort of pane-based. So there is a pane on the left and a pane on the right, like a window pane, and basically you can resize that, put text, and all of the immersive features that we're talking about here. But generally speaking, DEP has gone to either the cascade format that we're talking about here, or the web reports that we'll talk about a little bit later for our story maps. And again, you'll know if you start working with story maps, you can't really force your content into one of the formats. It just kind of works or it doesn't. So this is just the one that's been working the best for our information.
Excellent, thanks. So the bits and pieces here are pretty self-explanatory, but if you wanted to change this text, here are your options. So you can right justify, left justify, center. You can make your text big or small. You can see with the ESRI Story Map, your options are somewhat limited. Like I said before, up here in the settings, you can change the style or the look of the text, and you only had, I think, 4 or 5 options maybe. And here you can see you change the size. Not a whole lot of difference going on there. What I did here is that I added another section, and you can either add another text piece or you can add media. And here what I did is I actually added media. And when I added media, I added the ESRI Story Maps website link. And then what that did is it brought it up as immersive. So if I go in here, I can edit it. One of the things to pay attention to when you're building story maps is each slide that has an orange bar here or an orange check mark is kind of a warning, letting you know that depending on your platform that you're using, you may experience user issues. And here's what this is actually saying. So for this website in a mobile application, it may not work on mobile. So what we can do is just add an alternate image, or what we might actually want to do is simply add the link in text. A lot of times it's great to have this like multi-layered immersive interaction, but that can quickly expound into just too much. It's too busy. So we tend to stay away from things like this per se and maybe go to a link that puts you into a different tab. But you can see this is fully interactive, the website itself, within the text box. One of the great aspects of an ESRI Story Map. Everything is kind of built for you. You don't have to know code or have any of those types of issues. It's just there and it works. So if we wanted to, we could add anything, ArcGIS from Flickr, Google, Unsplash. You can link to your own content that you may have on one of your servers or external-facing servers for your department. And that's pretty much it there. Go ahead, Carrie.
One thing I want to add, when you're linking, everything has to have HTTPS in front of it, or you're likely going to get an error. So it's one of the things that ESRI has just recently switched to, but basically it's just an extra level of security. So that's one thing that might throw you, particularly if you're already using story maps and you get some kind of weird error, check the links to see if they're HTTPS. So that's one of the things that we sort of learned the hard way when ESRI instituted this. We knew it was coming, but we didn't really know what kind of ramifications it was going to have until our stuff broke. So I just want to put that out there, that everything needs to be pointed to a secure server when referencing links in these story maps, this in the ESRI particular format.
Yep, excellent point. So we're just going to walk through creating a story map real quick, some tips and tricks, some basic stuff. So let's get into the basics right now. So what you're seeing here is we're transitioning into the next slide. So this is swiping across. We're going from story maps here to the basics here. As we come up, the basics, the main piece comes up, which as you process through it, I think it disappears. So you can talk, it does not. No, it does not disappear. So what we're doing here is, like I said, this is an immersive section. What we're doing is adding pieces. So this is the next section. So this section here has this piece of script and title. You can add a narrative and talk about things. And then we're transitioning over to this sub-slide here. And here what we did is we added some text, and we actually added an ESRI story map within this ESRI story map. So what you can see here is this is looking below the surface, our macroinvertebrate story map that we just released December of last year, I believe. So you can see that's immersive. Once again, you're going to have and run into issues potentially when you're linking within links. And you could always just add text and add a link here if you wanted to. Quick point is if you wanted to change where this is coming up at, you can do that. You can even change the theme, light text to dark text, or light and dark backgrounds. As you can see, if I do that, what happens? It changes it a little bit. So just so you know, if you have left, center, and right justification on the text boxes as well. And this is how you would change them. Moving to the next slide, you'll notice that the picture in the background has moved. The reason that is because what happened is I went in here into this next slide and I adjusted the picture a little bit. What that ends up doing is it changes the view as you're moving around the slide. So that can be somewhat problematic for flow reasons. So what you want to do in this case is you might want to just go ahead and duplicate that slide. And when you duplicate that slide, it basically takes the picture and its position and duplicates it, creating a more seamless transition in your slides within the main group slide. That makes, yeah, that should make sense. Like I said before, we don't have a whole lot of options for text and styles. Once you click on the text, you can change its position within the box, and you can change its general size from large to small. You can also change the position of the box like we talked about before. This is, here I added a center box with text. This text is large. One of the main points that I want to make here with this basic slide is you want to make sure that your pictures are edited and cropped and the right colors, everything the way you want them before you bring them in. So once again, if you don't have the perfect pictures, having something like Lightroom or Adobe Photoshop might be useful. Even the new Windows 10 photo editor can be quite useful. But make sure you get your pictures cropped properly and then rotated properly before you bring them into ESRI. Just a quick tip. Now we're transitioning to this next slide, tips and tricks. You can see there, if I wanted to add another one, we can add a title in between called tips and tricks. And we can call that there, tips and tricks. We can add media. Once again, that can be anything. That can be a picture or even video. So tips and tricks. So that's, like I said, just notice how when the picture swipes up, I had the same picture in the background, and you can kind of use that to blend into another topic without having a different background if you didn't want to. And this is a new section right here. And we create, once again, we create new sections by hitting this plus button here. As you can see, as I'm scrolling down through, I'm going through different map styles. So what I did here is I'm linking to a map that I created in ArcGIS Online. So I'm just linking to one of my web maps, and then this is just doing the transitions. So what you see here is a heat map of Pennsylvania. And we can go ahead and explore the map by clicking this button. And this can be changed as well in this edit point here. So you can click button to enable or make it fully disabled or enabled. So this swipe function here is done by changing the transition of your mini slides within the section. And that's just simply done by this. You can fade or you can slide over to the next one. Here you can see as I move into the video from this map, I am fading into a picture. So that's how your slides within a section are transitioned. You can see, I do want to make one quick point. When you do add videos, if you have a YouTube channel and you're linking to a video within your YouTube channel, when you need to put REL equals 0 at the end of your link. And what that does is it'll keep cycling through the video instead of making the what you don't want to have happen.
No. Actually, the REL equals 0. Dustin's close, and so I want to talk a little bit about the YouTube developing. So what that means is it's not going to show relative additional videos at the end. So if you run a video to the very end in YouTube, oftentimes you'll get a collage of what YouTube believes is your related videos or similar videos, and oftentimes it's videos that may or may not have anything to do with what your topic really is, or maybe it's really contradictory to what you're trying to show. So if you want to prevent that collage from coming up, you can write REL equals 0 at the end. In addition, I want to point out here that if you go to just Google YouTube developer, there is all kinds of URL parameters that you can add, including the one that Dustin just mentioned with the looping, that you can add right to the URL of a YouTube video. And this is for any YouTube video, but it's really nice for here in Story Maps. You can add that to the end of your URL and cause the video to do things differently within your story map. So you can start a video at a certain time, you can end it at a certain time, you can automatically loop it, you can do all kinds of things with just manipulating that URL. So that's one thing that if you're going to use YouTube, and I do encourage you to do that because it does give you the ability to do a lot of things once that video is uploaded.
Excellent, thanks. And what I'm doing here now is transitioning back to a map. And I want to show how you can kind of run the show for the audience. I might have to reload this because this isn't quite doing what I wanted it to.
Your wireless and internet might be.
Yeah, our wireless internet might be causing some issues here. So basically what you're seeing here is a map. Sometimes when you display maps, it's hard to display the legend within the map unless you create it as a picture. But what you want is you want an interactive map that people can pan and move around with. So to get around that legend issue is you can kind of pan around the map and give people the ability to show the legend through your text and through your narrative storyline. So you can see here everything in blue is exceptional value, everything in pink here is cold water fishes. And as we pan around the rest of the state, we can see other parts loading. So here's their streams, exceptional value streams. I can go ahead by clicking this button here and just simply adding a picture, and then you can see the high quality streams there with a green. Obviously, the other option is to add the legend. And you can go ahead and add a legend, creating a picture and just simply adding it to your text box. It's always an option. All right, so really that's the nuts and bolts of creating a story map in ESRI. So I don't have a whole lot of experience with building story maps. I spent probably about 3 or 4 hours working with Carrie, learning some basics, and I just went running and went ahead and built this myself. So in about a course of a day, I pretty much, with the help of Carrie, learned how to build story maps. It's not difficult. It is really user-friendly when you get into building ESRI story maps. Overall points, I would recommend that you try to tell a story and don't overwhelm the audience with too much information. You want to keep distractions to a minimum and stay on core topics. So if your story map is about macroinvertebrates in Pennsylvania, keep it about macroinvertebrates in Pennsylvania. Don't go into a tangent about how, we have this many miles of assessments in Pennsylvania and this is impaired and that's impaired. Turn those tangents into new story maps. Remember, you can always take a tangent and link it into your existing story map. It's always an option. One of the biggest points about a story map is content takes the longest to develop. Sometimes what the best thing is to do is, if you're not comfortable with story maps, build your content in PowerPoint. Use those slides, make sure the pictures look good, work on your flow and what you're going to say, make it as condensed as possible, and then try to replicate your PowerPoint in the story map. Breaking that apart tends to help, or it has helped me in the past. Anything else, Carrie, with overall points, story maps? Okay.
Sorry, no.
So now we're going to transition into something different. So you can see here I added the title page. We shouldn't only be thinking about ESRI Story Maps. Not everybody has access to ArcGIS or ArcGIS Online, and there are other options out there to create an immersive report that has a high impact to the people that are going to be looking at it. And one of those options that we have is web reports. An example of a web report is EPA's air quality report. I'll just scroll up to the top here. If anybody's seen this, this is air quality trends. This is actually their newest one, I think, for 2017? 18. So you can see here it's fully immersive. It looks like a story map. It kind of functions like a story map. But once you start noticing differences, there's some details in here that this report has that you wouldn't necessarily be able to get into an ESRI story map quite yet. And that's where the power of a web report potentially is. So let's get into it a little bit. They are code-based. So this web report you can actually get off of GitHub for free. Pull the code and you can run it and be able to see everything that you see here on a website. And you can get that here at this web link here. If you guys want to, go ahead and copy that down, and that is where you can get this code. Another example of a web report is our oil and gas report. This links to, I think, our old one, the 2016 one. One of the things you need for web reports, obviously the ability to work with code, but also Visual Studio. Visual Studio is where you work with the code and then be able to run the code and see what the result's going to be. So I'm going to let Carrie talk about web reports right now.
Okay, thanks, Dustin. So a couple of things I want to mention. Dustin said about having the immersive charts and graphs and things not as intuitive in an ESRI story map as in this particular code. And that's somewhat true, that statement's somewhat true, but you can have some sort of immersive charts and graphs within ESRI story maps as well. How you approach it is a little bit different though. So I wanted to point out that you are able to get them in there with the same technology that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. So I'm going to loop back around to that in just a second and tie that back to what I'm going to talk about here now. So hold that thought. But basically what we're looking at here is an example page of one of our integrated report 2018 web report pages in code. And so the code that we're looking at started with EPA's air trends. Again, Dustin mentioned we had done our very first report that was similar to that in 2016 here at DEP for our oil and gas annual report. And this type of report has taken off extensively in the department and is really good for reports that have a lot of text, some things that are a little bit more out of the box than the ESRI that we just showed you. If you need more customization, and again, I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of this section with some of the things that are available. But basically, I kind of wanted to talk about what the code is that we're looking at. So this is in Visual Studio, and Dustin mentioned Visual Studio. That's just one of the programs that you can use to work with the code. It's the one that we sell here because we're a Microsoft shop, so everything integrates with that, but some sort of mechanism to work with code. We're looking at JavaScript, and there's Bootstrap wrapped around it. So some of the things that you see here are just inherently Bootstrap functions. So each of the sections that we're looking at, and this will make a little bit more sense when we see the picture in the next slide, but the section that we're looking at here is going to have sort of two panels. Dustin, yeah, if you want to scroll to the picture, and I'll talk about it and then I'll come back. So basically, the code that we just looked at, and we'll go back to that in a minute, is looking at the left-hand side of this particular slide. So if we go back to the code, notice that the very first section at the very top is your title. So the Pennsylvania Water Resources. So when we scroll down, you'll see that that's the title. The next is just simply the text. And then the next little sections are some of the neat effects that you can get with Bootstrap. And that's the hover effect thumbnails. So when you actually hover over these images, animation happens. You don't need to put that in there, but it's just kind of a neat little feature. And when you click on these different buttons, so one of the buttons, one of the maps that we'll click on is View Pennsylvania Streams and Rivers and View Pennsylvania Lakes, Bays, and Watersheds, or I'm sorry, Lakes, Bays, and Wetlands. So those are two areas that we're going to click on. And when we click on those, it's actually going to open up what's called a modal. And a modal is one of the things that is also inherent to Bootstrap, and it basically allows you to open something up within the report. So it's not opening up a separate web page. And this is really nice, particularly what Dustin's hovering over here. If you were to click on one of these, not in this example, but in the actual report, it would open up a box within the report showing you a map. They're fully interactive and they're fully immersive. And so we've actually used ESRI Story Maps, so some of the maps and online templates through ArcGIS Online to hook into these modals. So basically, Dustin, if you keep scrolling to the next section, the modal that is coded here is what's hooked to the previous code. So the previous code pointed to this modal, and then Dustin, if you highlight the website there, that's actually going to an ArcGIS Online map. Excuse me. So basically, you can see here that this is all custom, and that's the modal.
Yeah, so as you can see, I just want to point out one more time. So we have the general title and the text. We have a modal here, is that correct? And a modal right here. And what you're seeing in those modals, in that script, is this here and this here. And that basically defines this whole half. Now, in the code here, this is just a picture of the code. The rest of it going down would be the other side of this point here.
Yeah, so basically the table that Dustin just showed is simply using HTML table tags. That's the only thing that's creating that table, just a super simple, the TBL tag for tables. So I kind of want to wrap up my first point here in saying that you can embed all kinds of technologies within this particular kind of report. And some of those charts and graphs that Dustin mentioned, they can use a couple of different technologies. So they can use something we use here called Highcharts. You can use Plotly, which is another kind of freeware. It requires more development. Or just a straight-up D3 technology. And you can embed some of those if you store those particular applications maybe on your own server or on a web server somewhere. You can reference some of those interactive charts within a regular story map, but they're not inherently working within the report. So that's where I wanted to kind of wrap up that initial statement, in that you can put some of this kind of stuff sort of in story maps, but this web report is a really cohesive way of looking at the whole thing, tying all of the charts and graphs together, as well as all of the maps. You can have things open up within. You can tie in ESRI web maps, ESRI story maps, pretty much anything that you want. It's 100% custom.
Great. So I just want to show an example of what Carrie was just talking about with the chart. So if we go into this is development draft integrated report. She was talking about Highcharts and these interactive charts that you could embed. This is a current rough draft of our 2018 integrated report. Here's an example of that. So you can see this chart here, it's interacting with you looking at the different aspects. And you can turn on and off different groups of data, and it's just fully interactive. You can download the data itself that is used to build this chart, or you can download and print this off as a JPEG. It's just extremely useful for people getting a lot of information out of one slide or one report. So one of our most effective charts that we use is this one here. So stream assessment status. So we have the 4 uses that we assess in Pennsylvania. and the current status. And we can see that we have 0 unassessed water supplies and how many miles are retaining and how many miles are impaired. But there's more to it than that. Of course, we can turn off and on this stuff to get different aspects. And when you go ahead and print this stuff, it will print the way it looks as it is. So it's pretty useful. But if you're looking at impaired miles, you might be asking yourself, well, what are the sources of the impairment? Or what are the causes of impairment? Well, we add all of that tremendous amount of information into the next tabs. Once again, these are fully interactive. As you slide over them, you can see the uses and the miles specific to source unknown or agriculture. And once again, you can turn these on and off depending on what you might be interested in. Let's say you're only interested in looking at aquatic life. That's the power of Highcharts. That's what I think makes web reports so powerful and descriptive to the public, because it gives us the opportunity to present information in many different ways depending on your interests. And once again, we have the same thing with causes. So the causes of impairment for streams. Siltation, if we turn off aquatic life and only look at recreation, we can see that pathogens here are the highest cause of impairment for recreation. So pretty interesting stuff. So I just wanted to show an example of that in a web report before we move on. All right, so what do you need to develop this stuff? I want to go over that specifically for ESRI Story Maps and for the web reports, and Carrie's going to chime in here as well. So infrastructure, what do you need to build an ESRI Story Map? Well, you do need ArcGIS Online, but not just a user account, you do need a publisher account. So that's an important point. ArcGIS Desktop with advanced licenses, that's like ArcInfo.
So it's just called ArcGIS Advanced today. It used to be ArcInfo years ago,
Gotcha.
but now it's ArcGIS Advanced. ArcGIS Pro also will work for these sorts of things. So advanced licenses are needed for the things that some of the things that you saw us do here. It's not necessarily required for a general story map, but advanced licenses will do some of the things with the spatial analysis and the heat map type tools and things that Dustin was showing a little bit earlier.
Photo and video editing software, do you really need this stuff? No, probably not. But I will say all the pictures that I'm showing here today, they were processed through Lightroom, and that's an Adobe product. So Adobe, you might be familiar with Adobe Photoshop. Adobe Lightroom is just one way you can change exposures. You can crop. It's a quick editing tool that allows some play around with colors as well. I use that for everything. Go ahead.
I was going to just add that, you know, it's one of the softwares that you don't think you necessarily need to do a story map, but I do recommend having some sort of way to do something with your photos. And, you know, that's the creative side that you can pull out with these story maps. You know, in the looking below the surface that Dustin referenced, there was one slide where we circled all the macroinvertebrates, and I actually made some of them disappear using Photoshop, because just the way the picture was coming through, you know, what we were trying to show. So, you know, it's something that you don't think about when doing GIS or story maps necessarily, but something that I would recommend having some access to.
Right. I'm going to make a point related to that in number 6, YouTube channel. Do you need a YouTube channel? No. But you saw today earlier that having a YouTube channel is fairly useful. And if you really want an immersive story and you want to show some movement in a video, it's one of the best ways to do it. And I don't believe that costs anything.
No, a YouTube channel is free, and you can have all of your videos unlisted, meaning you're never going to find them unless you actually have the link to put them out there. So that's actually how we do a lot of the videos for DEP. DEP does have a channel that is public, and we do put public videos out there, but we also have a lot of unlisted or hidden videos out there, you know, that we just use as a pass-through for these particular story maps. So it's something that I definitely would recommend. Again, with those development tools I mentioned earlier, you can really start to leverage videos in ways that, you know, wouldn't be possible with just general out-of-the-box kind of software.
Right. So you do need an external GIS server to host and serve the products to the public. And You could use ArcGIS Online, but the issue with ArcGIS Online is that using ArcGIS Online and putting material on there costs credits. And credits get used up by usage and time, is that correct?
So credits are one of these enigmas with ESRI ArcGIS Online, and there's not really a set true answer as to what's used when. But I can tell you that, I mean, an external ArcGIS server certainly isn't required, you know, all caps, bolded, or anything like that. But we do that here just in our infrastructure because we can, basically. I mean, we have that external server. We don't use ArcGIS Online to host the information, meaning the information that Dustin was showing you doesn't live in ArcGIS Online as far as the underlying data. So all web maps and the actual story map, that does live in ArcGIS Online, and the credit usage is minimal. But once you start getting particularly tile caches and things like that, so some of the pictures that we showed you earlier of the heat map when Dustin swiped and then it showed, you know, points, so some of that, that would consume thousands of credits. It would consume a lot to create it in ArcGIS Online, and it would consume a lot to host it and to live in ArcGIS Online. So again, depending on your organization structure, you may or may not, it may or may not matter. I mean, but one thing to be aware of is how you're using ArcGIS Online and what you're doing. So in our case, the functionality that you're seeing here, we need the external server or we would just blow through the credits. So we're using ArcGIS Online simply as a pass-through in order to pull services into our story maps. So, and if you have questions on that, I'd be happy to get into more detail about that later.
Sure. And then the last one is the external-facing web server. I think, once again, that allows us to post things out without having to pay for credits. Is that correct?
So with the external-facing web server, again, this is not necessarily required, but it's a really super nice to have because that way we can have our internal components, our external components in full control. We can also control the web URL. So I personally hate ESRI's huge, long URLs, and at the state here, we're not allowed to open their short little URLs. They're blocked. So we get around all of that by just putting it on our own web server and hosting it that way. And that way we can control what the URL is, what it says, what it does. We can also put all of our own tracking in it, showing all of our own usage, all of our own analytics. It just gives us a lot more control. So again, not a 100% requirement, but it is just a nice to have, and it's how we're putting everything together here.
Excellent. All right, so personnel. Obviously, it takes a team. GIS, somebody in GIS that knows the infrastructure. I'm just a biologist. I know how to do biology, but sometimes I have to do coding and I have to understand GIS. And could I be all 6 people here? Yes, I could be. But it always works better when you work with a team. And these are our recommendations for the team that you would build for making story maps. So somebody in the business or the program, that is, if it's about water quality and macroinvertebrates, somebody should be there that is a biologist and knows water quality. Obviously GIS, somebody in communications. We as scientists don't always communicate very well to the public. Having a communication specialist is very helpful. The other person that I found helpful in our development of the macroinvertebrate, and actually all of our story maps, is somebody from our education group. It really helps with them working in tandem with communications to produce a product that far exceeds our expectations and the public's. Obviously, administration, your policy, your legal, administrators, people like that, they need to be, all this stuff needs to be filtered through your administration. And obviously IT, web services. You know, if you have an external-facing server, they need to be in control of that. Like I said before, could you be all these people? Yes, you could, but it does help to have a team. So what about web reports? How are they different? Basically, you do need Visual Studio or some way to manipulate and work with the code. Graphics, we have done in Highcharts. That's one that we go to. If you click on this link, I think it would go to it once you're in the actual the viewing aspect. We're in development right now, so if I click on it, nothing's going to happen. But Highcharts, Plotly, D3, go to these websites, check them out. Like I said, we like to use Highcharts. It is free to use, but once you publish the Highchart to externally to the public, then we have to pay Highcharts for the use of that code.
Right. So basically how the licensing works, there's different levels of licensing. To develop against it, you can just download it from their website. But like Dustin mentioned, as soon as you put that out to the public to see anything in a full production environment, then you need to have a license. So there's different licensing levels. There's, I think, a single, like a bucket of 5, an enterprise. I'm not even 100% sure of the licensing. But that's where we pay for the license and so that we're able to, legally and officially put the charts out to the public.
Right. And you're probably going to need the ArcGIS products. Could you get away with building a web report and not use ArcGIS? Yeah, absolutely. Would it save you money? Probably. But you can see from some of the examples that I showed in our 2018 integrated report, having those ArcGIS products and resources makes for a better web report.
You still have that up?
I do, yes.
The one with the maps and all the little graphs and charts, is that you fully needed the drop down?
Oh, yes, exactly. I know which one you're talking about. So here's an example. This is groundwater status. And basically it's just showing dots on the map for different parameters. The difficult thing about this is we want to just look at one parameter at a time. So if we go to iron, is it going to load? Yes, it will. Perfect example.
Yeah, so basically, in order to do this, we needed to use ArcGIS Online. This is just I think this is the basic view or the basic template just within ArcGIS Online. But this would have been a whole lot more difficult to make this do what we want it to do. Notice it's interactive. So Dustin just clicked on a feature and pulled the information up. I mean, there's really no way that I can think of to accomplish this with all of the changing imagery in the background and everything else. So we used ArcGIS Online to do all of our mapping and then just embedded it right within the custom web report.
Once again, this is a web report. This is not an ESRI story map. But having this ESRI product, as you can see, is extremely useful. Oh, yes. So photos and video editing, just like story maps, I believe you should probably have them, and an external-facing web server. For infrastructure for personnel, it's the same. Could you get away with having some of these? Yes. But we recommend having at least a representative for each one of these aspects of personnel. Pros and cons. So, story maps, pros. They are simple to create. They can be housed in the cloud, which relieves internal and external infrastructure requirements. It has that potential. You might have to pay for credits, but it might be worth it if it's only one or two things. They are relatively easy to edit. You can see here if I wanted to add another slide, I could do that by hitting the plus button. Very easy to work with. Anybody can have access to this. You can easily reference pictures and other media, as you see, by just editing and adding in either new slides or new sections through that. You don't need to know coding, and ESRI already gives you, and the template that we're working in today is Cascade. And it is an immersive technology. You can interact with it. Anything else, Carrie?
No, I think that's good.
Cons. One of my biggest hang-ups with ESRI Story Maps is that they are boxed into what ESRI has available. You do not have 500 options of text. You have 5 or 6 or 4 or 5. You are limited with that. We have experienced issues with mobile viewing. ESRI is still working on development of these, like Cascades and other templates. and they don't have everything quite right yet. They're working on it. Once again, if your links through your websites and your infrastructure are HTTP, that could potentially be an issue in Story Maps. You need to secure HTTPS. We have seen browser issues and unexpected behavior with ESRI Story Maps. You do need multiple GIS products, the ESRI desktop interface, advanced user license, ArcGIS Online, and or ArcPro. Titles and navigations can be a little clunky. I think through this presentation we've shown that. Web reports. There's a lot of pros to these. They are 100% customizable. You can work with the code and pretty much produce whatever you want. And we've done that. That's why we like web reports. We're doing the integrated report. It gives us the flexibility that an ESRI Story Map might not necessarily give us. It does still have an elegant look and feel, just like the ESRI Story Map does. Depending on how well you build your product, once again, it's about taking the time to bring together the content rather than just plastering something together in a report. You do have unique elements like the modals, those interactive maps that we talked about, and interactive charts and accordions, very nice tools that ESRI Story Maps don't necessarily have. Better titles and navigation options because it is more customizable. They do tend to be more mobile friendly, so your tablets and your phones are going to work with these a little bit better. We haven't had too many problems with browser issues. We've been able to make the 2018 integrated report draft now work in every browser, and it works well and surprisingly fast, especially for loading maps. We do feel that it is a little bit easier to navigate with subheadings. I'll show you a quick example of that. So we have main headings up here.
That would be equivalent to bookmarks in an ESRI Story Map. So for those of you who may have used a cascade, it probably looks exactly like what you're seeing here as far as your bookmarks. So when Dustin mentioned bookmarks, this is how a bookmark would translate into an ESRI Cascade Story Map.
Right. But the one benefit to the web report is that you can add in subheadings. So down here along the left-hand side, we have subcategories within each category. So if we go down to here in control programs, we can see now we're in control programs, and we have moved to the main section of 305B. Pretty interesting. Extremely useful. If you want to just talk about trends and measuring progress, you can get there very quickly. Anything else, Carrie?
Nope.
Okay. And there are more social media options with web reports because it is code-based. Our cons. You do have to use third-party elements if you want the nice charts, like Highcharts, for example, and that does come with a cost. Coding and software are required. I mean, sometimes not everybody knows how to do code. It is a learning curve. If you don't know it and need to learn it, that is a potential con. Personally, I've been through multiple learning curves with R. R is a great example of using code to do your jobs, and it's not easy, but I think the rewards outweigh the cost sometimes once you learn it. You do need a web server. It's difficult to get certain elements to work sometimes, especially with code. And if anybody knows how code works, there's sometimes a million ways to do the same thing, and not all million ways are going to work for you given your certain application. So that can be a difficulty sometimes. ArcGIS products may still be needed, as we've seen before.
One thing I want to add is, we mentioned about kind of using the EPA air trends as a start point, and it's good, but just a caution that it's not going to be a full replica. So if you use that as a starting point, you're still going to have to know how to get around some of what's in there. And sometimes people may argue that it's easier to just start over. So I actually recommend, downloading that air trends as a start point. We can make our code available as well, but use it to learn what elements go where and how you might want to see elements in your own kinds of reports rather than replicating it, because it's going to drive you bonkers if you try to replicate and try to do other things, because you're not going to know where maybe a simple color is stored within that code. So I just want to put that out there, you know, as you start working with some of the stuff that's available to you, and there's some starting points, but don't use it as a complete replica of what you want to do.
And that, with that, we're going to go into like the question and answer phase of this. I do really quickly want to show you just moving and organizing things around. I think I can potentially delete sections.
Over the trash can.
Where's that trash can at?
You have to get out of the movement. Drop them somewhere.
No?
No. Cover everything. It's not going to let you do it for some reason.
I see. Okay.
Normally it would just be right there when you hover.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But generally speaking, organization and deletion over here is pretty quick. Oh, I do have it locked. That's why. Oh, that's the in private. Sorry.
Yeah. There you go. Now it's there.
So once you're in organized mode, so you can copy entire sections and redo that. That's pretty useful. Or you can go ahead and delete. But I just want to show everybody real quick what that application looks like live. So this is what the public would see. We were in developer before for this presentation, but this is the actual presentation. You can see it's fully interactive. Things start to come up. And the things that we were looking at before, it might take a little while to load here. But we do have that form and function. We can see that things flow pretty nicely. Very much like giving a slide presentation in PowerPoint. And we can see how these things are interactive now as it loads. There's the map, and this is the map that I was trying to show. If this works, this is actually pretty nice. So we can see, we can zoom in to different areas of your map. Now I'm moved up to the north central part of the state. We talk about different things there. And we can zoom back out, and if we need to, we can go ahead and give a legend.
So basically, in the background, for those of you who are interested in how that's done, it's just different web maps set to different areas of the state. And when Dustin moved it to go over a different slide, the focus area is just at a different point. He's not zooming in or out necessarily on that web map. It's just different web maps that he's pointing to zoomed into different extents and saves. So it's actually different links and different references underneath it.
Right, and it's probably not going to show us.
Yeah, in the development mode, it's hanging up for some reason.
Yeah. But you can see that all I'm doing is I'm just moving the map around between these slides within this section, and that produces this result. Pretty easy. It did take me a little while to mess around with and get comfortable with, but once I figured it out, it's amazing what you can do. And then once again, the whole point that we went over before, you can see how easy everything transitions. You can see how my fade-ins and fade-outs or slides are now incorporated into the story map itself in live mode. So I just wanted to show everybody that, what this looks like outside of developer. All right, with that, we're going to pass it back off to Jasper. Carrie, do you have any? Okay. So we're going to pass it back off, and we can go ahead and go over any questions.
Right. Thank you both. For anyone has a question, please enter them into the Q&A box, and I'll read them off. So right now, we actually only had one question. The other was to share the EPA web report URL again, but I'll include that with the recording info. So one question is, do you have to have any specific software in order to view story maps, or are they available for anyone to see?
To view a story map, you can, it's just a URL, so the only software required is just an internet browser. To create them, obviously you would need an ArcGIS Online if you're doing an ESRI, or some sort of coding environment if you're doing a custom.
All right.
So what Dustin's doing right now is he just went out to our main DEP site where all of our GIS web maps and story maps and everything are sitting. So this is just the public site that anybody can access, and you can just go right out, click on the link, and it loads the story map. So all of the pieces that are required is simply stored in that URL.
Yep, so this is just an example that I had in the story map builder. As Carrie said, it is viewed by the public as a website. So we can link to that, and that was just a link to that website. It's pretty neat.
All right. Are there any issues with accessibility requirements with either the story maps or web reports when hosted on a state server?
So we have had these going through accessibility. One of the things that Dustin didn't point out in the ESRI Story Map, there's the ability to add alternate text for all of the images and all of the media. So for anybody who, would need that alternate text or additional information there, the custom side has gone through our OA, sort of screening for the ADA. We haven't gotten anything back as of yet. These are evolving, so these are relatively new, and I do anticipate that at some point we're going to be tasked with challenges, related to some of those issues. But so far, everything that we're doing passes the bar from our teams telling us and giving us the go-ahead with that.
Okay, great. Have you explored using AGOL's dashboard at all?
So I use ArcGIS Online's dashboard extensively. I'm not really sure how in reference it's relating to a story map per se, but I mean, we use the dashboards for real-time situational awareness, for example, at our Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency. We use it in our oil and gas to log real-time inspection reports and inspection data and information. So yeah, I mean, the dashboard is another tool within ArcGIS Online, not one that we really talked about here. Because it is an ESRI product, I'm sure you could use them within Story Maps if that's what you wanted to do and choose to do. But again, it does tie into ArcGIS Online. So pretty familiar with that aspect of ArcGIS Online as well.
Okay. What internet browsers work best for story maps?
I guess you want me to.
Personally, and Carrie can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've found that Google Chrome tends to work the best. It's the browser that all the modals work as expected. They're fast and useful. We've had significant issues with Internet Explorer, which is the aged Microsoft web browser, or Web Interface Explorer. Edge, I think, also has issues. The other one that's good is Firefox, and I don't have Firefox on this device for the department. Carrie does. I think they're pretty comparable.
Yeah, so Firefox works well, Chrome works well, Safari, if you're in a Mac environment, works really well. The thing is, the custom especially, we can put things in there to sort of help with these issues. ESRI in general, they work best even when you're composing a story map, a web map, whatever it is. There's more functionality from ESRI available through Google. They work in everything, though. There's not a browser that they don't work. It just depends on load, speed, performance, how things come back. Maybe once in a while we'll get a visual error or something like that we can go in and adjust for. But again, a lot of times it's out of our control with IE just being, an old browser with old technology. So we just found that the newer reports and the story maps work best in the newer, more modern browsers.
A great example of that is the integrated report draft that we currently have. You can see up here in this is an internal server that we have. and this is our latest version of the draft, and we've written into the script here that this is for IE. There were issues. Google Chrome was working fantastic. I believe Firefox was as well. We ran into issues with IE, and we had to make some adjustments accordingly, which is the result of what our developer here had called it. Now it works flawlessly in all browsers, but we did lose some functionality. This modal that we see here, you can see that it's reacting to my hovering just like we intended it to in the code, but when we click on it, you don't see that modal pop up. You see it pop up in a new tab. And that was because we needed it to work in IE, because a lot of people in the state, especially DEP, we're still operating basically off of IE. So if needed to see this and they didn't have Google Chrome or Internet Explorer, they would have seen issues. And we can't have that when we produce an integrated report. So that's an example of what Carrie was just talking about.
Awesome, great. So what ArcGIS platform did you use for that particular story map? Was it Enterprise?
Which store, the Cascade?
Yeah, I think so.
No, it's just ArcGIS Online. Excuse me, ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Desktop 10.4.1 Advanced.
Okay.
It wasn't Enterprise. We don't have ArcGIS Enterprise. We have ArcGIS Server Enterprise, but we don't have Enterprise apps or anything like that yet.
Right. When I created that story map, I literally created everything in ArcGIS Online, and I built this from the ground up. That was a platform that I used to build the presentation you saw today.
Okay. And the last one I see now, unless some more come in, how much data storage is needed to use story maps and web reports?
So I'm assuming that data storage is talking maybe in ArcGIS Online, I'm not sure. So I'll kind of address both of them separately. The very scientific thought-out answer is it depends. So data storage is one of those things that, you know, again, depending on where your data lives, depending on what it does, depending on how many images you've got, how many videos you're storing versus how many videos you're referencing as a link, there's no set answer to how much data is being stored. You know, if we were to look at kind of our overall organizational page, I'll say that our credit usage for story maps is minimal. And I'm talking maybe 4 a day or something like that, and that's department-wide. It's small. For the custom report, you know, that data storage is actually going to be a lot higher than an ArcGIS Online story map. And what I mean by that is because it's all custom, the data is stored all together. So if we've got videos that we're not referencing via YouTube, so if we're just referencing like an MP4 or something that's stored within the code itself, within the files and folders behind that code, that data storage could get huge on our server. We don't like to do that necessarily because it hits performance, so that's also why we like to put it out on like YouTube or something like that, or out on a web server somewhere that we can access. So again, you know, it's going to vary depending on what you're doing, how you're doing it, the process behind it. I mean, there's a million answers to that question. But we have found that storage in general isn't a humongous deal for us, just how we're doing it and the process that we're using today.
Okay. And then for developing web report, specifically the graphics, did you explore the options of using ArcInsight instead of coding?
Yes, so I actually did look at Insights, but it is not a product that we have here on our state contract, and it's not something that we're looking at necessarily. We're using Power BI, so again, we're a Microsoft shop, and that's the sort of analytics BI type software that we're using here. So yes, Insights is another one that you could certainly use. It's not one that we have used here. How that works, I can't tell you because I have not personally worked with it other than to test it out and say, yep, there it is. So, you know, go for it. If Insights is something that's available to you and something that you've got, go ahead and see what it can do for you.
Okay. Do you have web developers make web reports, or did you have scientists just pick it up?
So we kind of had a hybrid approach to that. So the coding itself is actually done on the GIS team, so that's my team here. And we have developers on staff on the GIS side of things. It helps that my background's biology, so I could kind of work with the biologists to speak that language and help to crack what you're seeing. I've learned it on my own, but the biologists here at DEP, they're not developers. Dustin's picked up some working with us and our team. I would never, ever require that of someone, you know, so, I mean, I recommend, it's a small team. I mean, basically, the IR report that you saw there was put together by Dustin, myself, and another developer with a couple, you know, other individuals offering ideas and topics of subject more than any of the technical side behind it. So it doesn't take a lot of folks, but it does take knowledgeable folks. So again, it's just basically if you have a biologist that wants to learn it, you know, Dustin has shown some interest in that, so we've worked with him to do some of that. But again, my team has a developer on staff as well as myself who dug into that and actually developed it.
Okay. So I think that is all of the questions that have come in. So we will end it there. For anyone who still has remaining questions, if you didn't get a chance to have them answered today, please put them into the exit survey, and we will, I'll get those to Dustin and Carrie. Please stay tuned for our next webinar, which will take place on Tuesday, November 20th at 1 p.m. Eastern, featuring presentations from Connecticut and Washington on stressor ID. Thanks again, Dustin and Carrie, for a great presentation today. I'll send out the information as soon as the recording is up. So, thanks, everyone.